Hello, my name's Claire from Conscious Chemo. I'm here sitting on the top of Buttermere Lake in the Lake District. I mean, what a beautiful setting. I am in between my 14th and 15th round of treatment. I finished my high dose chemotherapy in January. It's now July and I'm still on a low dose chemotherapy and an immunotherapy. So I'll be heading home for my 15th round in 8 days or so. But I've come up here with myself. I don't like to say by myself, with myself, and just to kind of reflect and contemplate. And it really has just been such an amazing and inspiring year that I've had, despite the diagnosis and the treatment, for all kinds of reasons. Which I've been sharing. But this video, I wanted to talk about my lowlights, just because I think it's really important to acknowledge when you are off centre so that you can come back to centre. And even though I have been really quite positive once I had the diagnosis finalised throughout, I have moved away from centre a few times, but I've pulled myself back. So for me, I think that the most challenging time was getting the diagnosis, because every time I went for a result of a test, I had to then have another test and then another test. And I think for the best will in the world, there's going to raise elements of fear with that. I was pretty good at centering myself when I wasn't at the hospital or the breast care unit. But as soon as I went in, it kind of brought, I think it highlights it, or it does something. And I remember on one occasion just feeling very, very emotional. It was a day I had the MRI scan and they'd had to take a second lot of biopsies from my armpit, and I was feeling a bit bruised by then and a bit battered. I hadn't ruled out a stage 4, and I just needed a good cry basically, and there was a bit of fear at that point. The lady in the MRI scanner was brilliant with me. I had my eyes closed during the MRI scan, and I was really breathing, and she actually told me I needed to breathe more. I was breathing so slowly doing my yoga practice breath that she said, actually, you need to relax a bit. You had to breathe more quickly and not as full. But I realised halfway through that I could open my eyes and see. I had my eyes closed for the whole thing, feeling a little bit claustrophobic because I was probably feeling a little bit anxious and a little bit off-centre. Well, I was definitely off-centre quite a lot. But as soon as I opened my eyes, I felt a lot better. So there's a little tip. You can see when you're in the MRI scanner if you open your eyes. So then I kind of pulled myself back to centre. So I was going backwards and forwards during the testing. But as soon as I had the final diagnosis, I'd made a decision to have the chemo, which was a big decision for me. Lots of contemplation on that, and reading and researching and speaking to people from both sides, medical and alternative. And then tuning into myself and deciding that I was going to take one round at a time and see how I went. So once I started the chemo, I had a wobble after my 4th round. I fell asleep and started crying in Specsavers, much to my daughter's embarrassment. And that will never be lived down. Mum, you remember the time in Specsavers? So I look back on that now, and it's quite amusing. But at the time, I was so tired. I literally could not keep my eyes open in Specsavers. So, and interestingly, it was my daughter's 18th birthday on the Sunday. And I'd probably overdone it looking back. So I had, obviously when you have your steroids, you're quite high the next day. So then the 3rd day, when I normally would have been resting more, I was writing a poem, with my daughter, reading out a poem, quite a lot of adrenaline-based stuff. So I think that was a lesson there, that it's really important to rest. So even if you feel like you can do something, it's not always the right thing to do, which is why I'm quite big on saying to try and give yourself that first week after each round to really let yourself rest and heal, do little bits. But I think I probably went too high on the adrenaline on that Sunday and paid for it in the week. It passed. It didn't take that. It wasn't that long, but I was off centre. And I also think, obviously, hormones are being affected a lot for women when they go on, and probably for men as well. But when you go on the high dose chemo, but I can usually get to centre. But that was probably why I tipped there. And then I had another meltdown on New Year's Eve. That was my biggest meltdown. And I think there was a lot of fear up on the ward. It was New Year's Eve. My kids were with my ex. And I actually just think I needed a good cry as well, as much as anything else. But I do think there was a lot of fear on the ward, and that was, I was picking up on the energy, and then it just triggered, and I just cried and cried and cried. And when I was having my treatment, I felt okay. I was meditating and praying for the people that I could feel were very fearful. But I got home and I just started crying. I couldn't stop. It did feel hormonal as well, but I think it was everything. And maybe there's some subconscious stuff coming through. But my friend came and sat with me and just distracted me through conversation, and it was the best thing I could have done at that time. I needed that distraction there and then. So that was great. So I was off centre around that time. So pulling yourself back to centre when you're off centre through either talking it out with a friend or meditation. Often I can do it with meditation, but on that occasion I needed to talk it out. So just observing what's happening, and then bringing yourself back to centre, however that works for you, is a really powerful technique. If you don't observe it and you're constantly in that reactive state, it's very hard to find your centre. But when you're in your centre most of the time, you feel it quicker when you come off centre, and then you can pull it back more easily. It's also quite a good time to journal. So if you don't have somebody there, just to journal, so you're getting it out in some way. But just to know it's very normal and it's okay. And actually, I think emotional releases can be very, very healing. So that time, it's when you don't really know why you're crying, but you just can't stop crying. I think they can be signs of just a needing to release. And probably some hormones tied up. So, and also perhaps in hindsight, I could have prepared for that a little bit more, knowing that I wasn't going to be with my kids. It was New Year's Eve, I was having my 5th round, and I was on my own. It was COVID, so I had to be on my own, really. I was isolating. But perhaps in hindsight, I would have been best off planning something on Zoom or something. I don't know. But perhaps know yourself and decide whether or not, if there's going to be a situation that might be triggering, that you plan, or you just let it be and let it wash over you. And then about 5 days after my operation, I slipped then. And I think it was probably the anaesthetic wearing off, and I definitely slipped into negative self-talk, kind of that mindset of the poor me syndrome, a little bit of that, a little bit of neediness, and a little bit of probably some stuff that had happened in my past was rearing up. When I look back on it now, I think, so my mind started thinking negatively, basically, based on past situations. And up until then, it had been absolutely great. My operation went brilliantly. I had one of my best friends as a recovery nurse. I was in a private hospital because of COVID. I mean, honestly, it couldn't have gone more smoothly. The operation went smoothly. I did my coherent breathing, and I did a really beautiful meditation before I went in. I had my own room, so all that was great, and my healing was going fine. And then I just had this day, or just this mindset just started feeling a bit negative, and I think it could have been an anaesthetic come down. So I would just be mindful of that. So if you just notice yourself slipping into negativity, again, just knowing that it will pass, it's normal, and then trying to notice that that's what it is, and it isn't anybody around you, because it could be very easy to start projecting that your negativity onto others, and then you might then get something back that's not helpful. Whereas if you can acknowledge that that's where you're at, you've slipped into a little bit of negative mind patterning, then perhaps you can ask for support in a way that people don't feel that you're blaming them for the way you feel, which I think can happen when you project. And I know I've done that before. So for example, recently I went in for my 14th round, and I was just feeling like, it's very, very mild, because I'm dealing with it really well, but I just had this feeling that, people weren't acknowledging it. The high dose had a lot of support, and then because I wasn't really getting many side effects, and I was dealing so well and living a pretty normal life, and have been ever since, people have just kind of forgotten about it, or it wasn't mentioned. And I was just in the waiting room, I was waiting for 2 hours, And I noticed that in myself, and I knew that it was just a little bit of my ego wanting, a little bit of love. And I was messaging my group of really close friends, and I just mentioned in the group that I was having my 14th round, and I was messaging about something else, and just said, I'm just having my 14th round of treatment, so many rounds left. And so I didn't ask for anything, I didn't demand anything, I didn't say, can't believe you've forgotten that I'm still having chemo. What I got back was, when I just mentioned, really good, positive, feel good messages of support, you're rocking it, and just those nice messages that you like to hear sometimes. So I would say, if you are feeling negative, try to word, and you're feeling like you want a bit of love, just let somebody know where you're at or what you're going through, and then see what comes back, rather than demanding or projecting blame, which I think can be easy to do when you are feeling quite negative. Because the way you give out and come across is going to affect what comes back to you. So if you do feel like you're not getting something that you need, then you could either ask for something very directly. Would you mind if you bring me around some food at the weekend? That would be fantastic if you could. Or if it's more emotional, then just saying where you are and seeing what response you get. I mean, I actually didn't do it to get a response, but it's just the response that came, and it felt good. So using that as an example. So that happened after the operation, and then the last wobble I had was when I got the results after my operation. I was really, because I'd had a complete radiological response, so my MRI scan showed no evidence of disease, and because I had been supporting myself a lot throughout, right from the start, and done all the detoxing, I was reasonably hopeful I'd had a complete pathological response, which I think about 30 to 40% of women get with my type. And I hadn't. I had very close. I had a 2 mil residue in my boob, and I had a complete pathological response from my armpit. So I had a brilliant response, but I had read that if you have a complete pathological response from both, then it really puts you in a good stead. So the fact that I only had a 2 mil residue obviously still puts me in a very, very good stead. But I had to look at myself there. I had a few other things going on around that time as well. It wasn't just that. There was a few other things going on, and I guess as well, I decided that I wasn't going to have radiotherapy if I had a complete pathological response. I was going to skip it, and I was also considering stopping my immunotherapies early. But because I had that 2 mil residue, I took that as information that I needed to really respect this type of cancer, and that I decided to have the radio, albeit a more intensive prescription, and then actually switched my immunotherapist to this new Kadcyla, which has got a bit of chemo in it as well. So maybe that happened for a reason. If you're looking at the way that things unfold, trusting the way things are unfolding as they're meant to, perhaps that was the path I was meant to be taking. That's how I look at it now. But at the time, I had a little wobble over that, making more decisions. I opted out of a drug they wanted to give me that was going to make me not ovulate anymore. I decided not to have that. But I did start the tamoxifen. So that was a time, but I did a meditation and offered it, and I asked, and the wisdom that came through was cover yourself. So and now I really am pleased that I made those decisions. But when you're making those decisions, I think you can feel a bit wobbly, because there's no right or wrong. They are really difficult. But if you can try and take a step back and get to a place of neutral, and then go into meditation and ask, that's when I feel like I get the most wisdom that comes through. And that's it really. They're the times that I felt like I came off centre. That was the other, when I got my results and I hadn't had the complete pathological response, it was also a time when I was getting other symptoms, and I was being tested for a few other things that they needed to rule out, and they were ruled out and everything was fine. So I think perhaps that can just raise, once you've been diagnosed with something quite significant that you weren't expecting, when they test to rule other things out, even though you believe it's not going to be it, there's, you've got a memory of it being significant. So so we, you know, we can try and stay as present as possible, but it's human nature to just move off centre. I think the practice is to notice you've come off centre and pull yourself back, and then you're back on the path. And that really is the best any of us can do. And it all comes from being able to observe yourself, and that comes from the yoga and the meditation. So I would encourage you to really look at, if you're not already got a regular practice, I would really encourage that. It's made such a huge difference to my mind and therefore my body, and just to how happy I feel, my sense of overall well-being. So yeah, there's my 5 meltdowns that I had. They all passed. Yours will too. And it's okay to have them. In fact, I think it's probably just as important as the times I've also felt really liberated and free. And to acknowledge that you know, that is the path. That we're not always going to be on this high level all the time, and it's being realistic. It's getting to know yourself so deeply that you can come back to neutral once you move away from it, and that's all good. So sending you lots of love. I hope this has helped in some way. I hope there's some tips there that you can take from it, and I hope it reassures people that everything will pass. Everything will pass. Sending you loads of love, healing light, positive energy, high vibrations, and well wishes for as joyful and smooth and easeful recovery to well-being. Lots of love.